Hey, welcome everyone to this week's edition of Tuesday Open Coaching. I want to thank everybody for joining today. My name's Brian Doyle for any of those that have yet to have an opportunity to meet me. And today we're going to focus a little bit on security programs. And one of the things that we're going to do today is talk a little bit about how you can leverage CIS as potentially a framework to get started in building a security program with your customer. So again, I want to thank everybody for joining today. And it looks like we have got a pretty full room kind of building in here. A couple of quick things before we fully get started. And I'm sorry, some things are bouncing on your screen. If you've got any questions, I want to make these sessions a little bit more interactive. So while we do, I have an Ask Me Anything session at the end. If you do have any questions during the course of our conversation today, please drop them into the Q&A or into the chat. I certainly want to make sure that any questions you have that I can answer, I'll answer. And any questions I can't answer, I'll certainly seek out those answers and reach out to you individually. In terms of what we're going to do today, I want to kick off today's session a little bit about talking about client risk. Now, some of you may have seen this slide in previous coachings, but it's one I like to bring back to the top every once in a while and really talk about, when we're working with our customers to build a security program, there's really three areas that we've got to focus on. We've got to make sure that we're taking steps to safeguard data and IP, of course. And a lot of you are already doing that with the managed security programs that you're putting into place. So a lot of this is really your stack doing what you would expect it to do, identifying threats, detecting threats, and where possible, containing threats. So, again, this is where a lot of your automation lives and things that you need to take care of from there. Then the area that we're going to discuss and really talk about how CIS can potentially support you in is regulation, privacy, and protection. And this is really what I call the vCISO as a service layer, or the opportunity being vCISO as a service, but really the ability to build out, a program to manage your customers and really demonstrate some of the leadership capabilities of your organization and generate new revenue opportunity, maybe even going as far as building a compliance as a service program for your customers. Then, of course, one of our responsibilities also in any security program is managing response and evidence. Hopefully, we don't run into those situations where we've got a large-scale security response. But if we do so, we need to make sure that we are documenting the steps within that response, bringing together all the evidence that we collect during this process in the case we need to go to a legal or insurance type conversation where we might have to demonstrate that evidence and prove out what had occurred, either to make a claim or potentially, if we have to bring it to legal enforcement, help give them the evidence they need to continue to track down where the originating source comes from. So that's kind of the three basic areas within a program like this that we're focusing on. And, this is really addressing things like the day-to-day level, external, internal threats you see there. When we talk about regulation, privacy, excuse me, and protection, and what we're going to talk about in the CIS today, it's really focused on making sure that we're taking care of being good stewards of intellectual property, that we're helping our customers as they look and seek for cyber insurance and making sure that they're putting the safeguards in place to protect their environment as it relates to cyber insurance. If they're required to meet any compliance requirements, that is something that we want to address. And of course, some of the safeguards in CIS translate directly into other compliance frameworks, and making sure that we're looking at privacy the right way as well. Down below, what you're really looking at is kind of where these areas in the stack can impact a company. Obviously, any threats, external, internal, can certainly be a cause for concern to your reputation, your companies that you're supporting's financial capabilities, and certainly can disrupt and interrupt service. When we look at regulation and privacy protection, it's really more around interruption risk and certainly financial risk across the board. And when we look at response and evidence, really we're back to that reputation conversation. If we can't respond and show that we did our due diligence in safeguarding, we potentially can cause ourselves a reputation risk, or our customer. I shouldn't, relegate it just to us as the service provider. That could potentially put us out of business. So again, this is kind of the client risk framework that we've developed here, and just want you to kind of take a look at that and set the table a little bit as we head into the CIS conversation. Now, as we move into the CIS conversation, I want to talk a little bit about cybersecurity frameworks as a whole. There are a lot of cybersecurity frameworks out there, and a lot of the regulatory compliance frameworks do address cybersecurity as well. What I'm really focused on here, though, are what are some of the standard ones that we're seeing our customers utilize within BCIO Toolbox, and which are the ones that we're seeing our MSSP and MSP communities gravitating to most often. And the big three that have the most conversation going on these days are CIS Controls, NIST Cyber Framework, and of course the CMMC, now with 2.0 coming on the scene as well. Now, each one of these is absolutely addressing cybersecurity, but they go about it in a little bit different fashion for those that might not be familiar with it. In CIS Controls, there are 3 implementation groups. For those that are using BCIO Toolbox, think about how maturity levels operate. What these implementation groups really allow you to do is kind of segment your customer and put them into a category that they fit into. And it's a progressive process where you can move from one implementation group into the next one when the time is right and you've achieved the next level of cyber requirement in your business. At the NIST CSF, it's really a voluntary framework that's addressing 5 functions: the identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover functions. And it's a single level assessment, and it has 100 assessment standards that you need to look through. And a lot of MSPs are using this as a stepping stone cyber framework for customers that they're bringing into a new cyber hygiene program. And then finally, we're seeing CMMC 2.0 gaining some traction now that that new regulation's in. Currently, it sits at 2 level. There are 3 levels that will ultimately comprise the CMMC 2.0. And there's roughly 100 assessment standards focused on supplier risk for the most part there. And again, that's a DoD-driven requirement there. The CMMC will become a big part of the the DoD conversation as that continues to evolve. And we'll certainly be focusing on that. And when the NIST 800-172 framework is formally adopted, we'll certainly expand out the CMMC 2.0 and those that are using our GRC module today's instances. Now, there are a lot of other frameworks out there that folks are using for cyber security as well. The NIST 800-171, for example, is another DoD-driven risk assessment that really focuses on unclassified documentation and the handling of that unclassified documentation. And a lot of those questions are directly mirroring what's going into the CMMC 2.0. So that's why I kind of place that towards to the bottom. Also, for any of our customers that are coming in from other locales, obviously out in the UK, we have IASME Cyber Essentials as kind of the governing standard over there. Certainly, if you're building a cybersecurity program in the UK, you're probably focusing on those standards. Cybersecure Canada has come on the scene recently for our folks up north, and the Essential 8 out in Australia is becoming more readily adopted as cybersecurity becomes a bigger conversation out in that continent. Now, the reason I shared these 3 different frameworks here is there's nothing, if you're using any one of these and you have a partiality to any one of these, absolutely continue down that road. Honestly, I like all 3 of these control sets, but the reason we're going to talk about CIS really as kind of the stepping stone today is the ease of entering into it, the fact that it's a little bit more open standard type of framework, and the fact that it really is focusing on what our small to mid-sized business community is, which most MSPs are serving, are concerned about: non-targeted attacks. That's to say there's nothing wrong with NIST CSF. If you go back in previous trainings, we've done an in-depth deep dive on the NIST CSF. It is a great standard. I'm actually seeing some of my customers that when they get beyond CIS Controls 1, moving into the CSF and kind of adopting that when they really want to start addressing the respond and recover elements as well. So, I wanted to share a little bit of a high level on these three frameworks for anybody that might have some confusion where they sit and why am I picking one over another. But I will say this, if you move with any one of these three, you will certainly be consistent in at least bringing a better level of cybersecurity hygiene to your customers and developing a program that you can then support. Now, why CIS? From my standpoint, it's really because of the ease of use. It's an easy to follow progressive process. It scales as the customer matures, as opposed to the CSF, as I mentioned, is 108 standards from day one. It's a deeper dive than just risk. I like the way that the controls are really asking you to look at the status of different pieces within the process as well. It's not an all or nothing assessment. We're looking at, have we defined the problem? Have we implemented the solution? Are we automating that solution? And are we reporting on that solution? A big part of a good cyber program is not just implementing the tools that are going to identify, detect, and allow you to respond, but also having a level of governance where you're going in there and looking at the different controls that you have, making sure you're updating if things change within your technology set to make sure that those controls are still effective. We want to make sure that we're understanding if we can automate these controls and make them as simple as possible. And certainly we need to be reporting on these controls. So if you haven't built up, at least internally in your MSP, kind of a security program team and have somebody that's kind of keeping track of when things are occurring and putting a level of governance over your customers' individual programs and making sure that things like, let's talk about some individual controls. We're going in and looking at active users and making sure we don't still have active users that have been terminated in our customers, thus adhering to our user management controls. If we don't have a process for doing that, we could be running ourselves amok and find ourselves potentially liable should there be a breach, at a later date, and that customer kind of tries to pin the blame back to the MSP. So I'm not looking to put any fear, uncertainty, or doubt there, but if you haven't put a governance program in place and you're not thinking of these 4 different steps in the process, you might not be doing yourself justice internally, because, it's one thing to understand what the control is, but has it been defined? Has it been fully implemented? Sometimes we implement these things and it's only against a portion of the infrastructure. We have great intentions of going back, but we don't really see visibly if we have gone back. And that's what the CIS helps in doing. And the other thing I like is it really spans 18 different control families that helps you see quickly where improvements needed. Much like the CSF that has the 5, domains, the 5 different functions that you're managing to, this, when you scorecard it out, really gives you the ability to see the 18 control families and identify if there's any control families that are subpar at a glance and really help you work through this process. And it certainly helps with communicating with your customer as well. So what are these implementation groups I'm referring to? Well, it's just the way that the CIS breaks down the 153 total safeguards that are out there that make up the CIS version 8 controls. At implementation group 1, we're really focused on 56 safeguards. And this is the part that really appeals to me when we start talking about why the MSP community might want to consider CIS as a starting point for their customers when they really talk about building a better cyber hygiene and implementing a true security program. The reason is, I like this, is these 56 safeguards are really geared to what is concerning to most MSPs, or most small to mid-sized business customers, and that is non-targeted attacks. Most of these small to mid-sized customers are not being targeted for the information they have. They're being targeted through bot scans and various tactics that bad actors utilize out in the cyber universe to just see where there's openings within your environment. They may be doing port scans, and when they see ports that they can access open, they then go in there, and maybe that's when they're dropping in a ransomware with a time bomb. But they're not coming after that customer maliciously. They're coming after them because there's opportunity. So one of the things that implementation group number 1 allows us to do is really focus on these gaps that some of our clients might have within their environments and shut those gaps so we're not as susceptible to non-targeted attacks. The other thing it focuses on, and you see COTS hardware here on this presentation, but it really focuses on common off-the-shelf hardware solutions. And that is what most of us are selling to our customers. So a lot of these holes that are opened as a result of non-targeted attacks, if they can't be fixed through policy, procedure, or process, they can be fixed through general off-the-shelf hardware that your team knows how to deliver, you're skilled in configuring, and you can do a good job of delivering. It also focuses on and the opportunity, and the other reason I like it is it's an opportunity and a door opener for some of those customers you're going after. It's geared towards the companies that have limited IT or cyber experience on their staff. Most of them have no staff, and that's why they're coming to us in the first place. And if we can show that we can take both the leadership and operational position for those that need to adhere to this level, we can really strengthen our relationship with these clients, build a new relationship with our prospects, and put them in a good face going forward. Now, where does implementation group number one stop? Well, it really stops when we start building out our IT staff. It becomes a shared responsibility. And maybe we have departments that have different complexities within them and thus have different risk profiles and requirements. So that's really what implementation group is starting to focus in on. This layers on another 74 safeguards to the original 56 and make sure that we're addressing environments where there is a security team on site, whether it's internal or outsourced, that is looking at the technology, that is kind of acting in a day-to-day fashion here. We're increasing the complexity of what those technologies might be in this layer. Departments that have different risk profiles often also require enterprise grade solutions. These are not solutions that are necessarily off the shelf, but require some configuration or some analyst know-how to read the data that's coming into these systems and really being able to take action when required. And then ultimately you can grow into implementation group number 3, which is really where there's 23 additional safeguards geared to the enterprises that have direct security experts. So this is the enterprise layer. This is where there are security teams, sometimes even multiple security teams within a customer, both internal and external, that are working in concert to make sure that targeted attacks are not occurring. Generally, these customers will hold sensitive and confidential data that could be related to the public welfare. Think about your utilities. Think about large public institutions that are, our credit reporting agencies, as an example, our banks that have this sensitive information that, if it gets out, can really cause harm, healthcare being another, of course. So that's when these safeguards would come into play. And again, the reason I'm a big fan of the CIS, but by no means, do you need to travel just down this road, is those 56 safeguards up front are kind of right size for our teams to accomplish. They address those non-targeted attacks, and we can solve them with the solutions that we're comfortable with today, by and large. But again, there is, any cyber framework is going to help get you there. Now, what is our goal out of, building, going through this assessment? It's to help our customers understand where their risk is. They can document where they're accepting risk. There might be some problems that get uncovered that they've determined the cost of solution outweighs the benefit of having that risk taken care of, and they're willing to accept that risk and live with it. We want to understand what we're putting into our plan of action and milestones. And this is just a small example of kind of a high level of a plan of action and milestones and how we might track things. And then we want to look at the risk that's been satisfied, so auditors know what's been covered. So this here, being an idea of a plan of action, really what we're doing from our findings as we conduct our assessment is really just understanding, hey, what are the recommendations that we need to make? How much are these recommendations potentially going to cost for the customer? What's the timeline we want to look at implementation? And then as we start working our plan, tracking the progress of these POAM items. What's in progress, what's not been started, what's been completed. So if an auditor comes in, they can see the delta changes from one assessment to another. And then most importantly, in my opinion, who's the owner? We want to make sure as a service provider, if there's a breach down the road and a customer comes back to us and says, why didn't you take care of it, Mr. Service Provider? But in fact, it's something that was caused by something that they owned the responsibility for. We have that documentation. Guys, you've heard me say it many times in these coaching sessions and certainly in other we've done, liability is coming down to the MSP layer and MSSP layer like it never has before. So we need to make sure that we've got our ducks in a row. We understand who owns these projects. If our customers fall behind, we're using this program to hold them accountable and push them on the items that they are doing it, or accept that risk and document that. We want to make sure that we're covering our own on liability. If a customer decides to accept the risk and declines a recommendation that we have, that we're cataloging that so we can show that we've done our due diligence in at least presenting the option to the customer. Again, none of us is looking for a breach, and we all hope it doesn't come to the point of litigation, but we've certainly read about more and more MSPs and MSSPs being in that position. Excuse me. I'm so sorry, guys, fighting some allergies here. But, going back to what I was saying there, but unfortunately, if we do find ourselves in those positions, we want to make sure we have our supporting evidence and materials as well. So, before we go into the tool and just kind of look a little bit at what CIS looks like in BCIO Toolbox, for those that have not seen that yet, I do want to jump into, a little bit as it relates to, where's the opportunity sit for the MSP. And, one of the nice things about building a compliance as a service program is, sorry, guys, I need to get to the slide I was looking for here where we've got some pricing. Always a technical difficulty in life. Well, we're going to scrap that, and I'll just speak to what the slide says and bring it up in the non-slideshow fashion. And I'm sorry for the technical difficulty, guys. But, as we've talked about in some of the others, there's a real good opportunity for earning within the compliance sector as well. You'll see here when you look at various different compliance requirements out there, there's money in the opportunity. When you look at some of the standard cyber frameworks, though, it's a nice entry point with getting your customer into a compliance program. As you can see here, doing things like CIS, CSF, and some of the basic frameworks. These might be smaller engagements starting around $5,000 to $15,000. Your mileage may vary regionally, of course, but it's a nice way to enter with your customer. And if you do this right, you may want to look at building it as a service opportunity where you're really able to work with your customer and kind of keep an ongoing compliance look at things as well. We're always looking at how to drive more value with our customers. If we're just doing our assessments annually, like I did when I operated data centers, the negative there is, what if something changes the day after the assessment's done? It's basically obsolete on day one. So if you really set this up in the right way, it gives you an opportunity to build a compliance as a service program where you're keeping up on these standards from period to period. That, of course, gives you more reason to engage with your customer and stay sticky with them, and be able to update these frameworks on a regular basis so it never really becomes a chore for you after you complete that baseline. So, if you haven't thought about compliance opportunity, I encourage you to kind of take a look at these things here and explore and have conversations with your peers that might be building these programs. But I'm seeing more and more customers making some significant money. And certainly from a project basis, you might think the $60K for a NIST audit is out of control, but we've been seeing that happen now. Finally, from an overview standpoint, before we go into the platform, this is kind of an example of where you can build a VC as a service program. You can build it into levels. By no means is this anything more than kind of a guideline. But, if you look here at the bronze level, you're doing an annual compliance review and maintaining a plan of action, of course, reporting on when things do get completed. Great way to start with the customer, probably a low cost point of entry and something that you can bite off pretty easily because of the visibility you already have with your client and their environment as an MSP or MSSP today. Moving into the silver, now you're putting that management layer over it. Now you may build out the security team with the customer, put in that IT security governance layer, and really work with your customer in creating new policies, updating policies, reviewing the policies that they have for effectiveness. doing more than an annual assessment, but also looking at the hardware and software that's being utilized and making sure that the products are really giving the customer the best level of protection that they require. And of course, we're still maintaining that plan of action. And then when you get up to a gold tier, you're adding in maybe working with their human resources team, making sure that security is being addressed at all phases of onboarding and offboarding, and attending executive meetings. Again, guys, this is by no means the only way you can set up these programs, but these were some ways that, in polling my customers and really understanding what's going out there, we're seeing them kind of hit the marketplace, and I wanted to share those with you. So in our remaining few minutes that we have today, I just wanted to bring up an example of what a CIS program looks like within VCIO Toolbox. So for those of you that have not used CIS yet, or might not be a GRC subscriber yet and haven't seen this, this is kind of what a CIS program looks like in here. You'll notice that we leverage maturity levels to basically mirror the implementation groups that exist within CIS. So if I start here at maturity level 1, I'm mirroring implementation group number 1, and you'll notice I have the 56 standards here. If I move up to level 3, you'll see the full collection of the 153 standards existing here. For those that do live just in my QBR module, you'll notice that the answer key is a little bit different when you come into the CIS view as well. We are now looking at, are these policies defined, automated, implemented, and reported on? And we can really get granular about the status of each one of these policies. Here you can see for implemented, we can talk if only parts are being implemented on some, most systems, or all systems. And each one of these will weigh differently within your scoring rubric. Over here on the right-hand side, these just can allow you to turn it all green and all red very quickly, but really we're defining where this policy sits. Down below, we can add our vCISO notes. And again, for those that are not aware, these notes will get cataloged and become a running multiple choice list that you can use across all CIS customers. So common answers are basically dynamically being learned by the system. Down below here, we're able to document our best practices and really understand how that's working. And then we can take action. We can take action either by creating a ticket, creating a recommendation, which will ultimately become part of our plan of action. And in terms of reference and evidence side of it, as we conduct these assessments, we can align any evidence we generate. Maybe we've got a log file or a JPEG or a screenshot we want to align with the finding. We can either link that to a shared repository for documents we share with our customer. We can upload it into the system as its own independent file. And you'll see here, you can add policies from our policy library. So if you want to utilize any of the policies that we've pre-built for you, which you can download from our university, you can put those into your policy library and make them active for attaching during this process. These will then become linkable objects within your reports and easy for auditors and customers to retrieve in those reports as well. Now, when we talk about managing a program, it becomes a little bit different. You'll see here at the top of the process, that's a simple assessment that I just showed you there. But when you want to manage a program, you can actually add other GRC programs to this process. So if you had a customer that was maybe a healthcare concern as well, you might want to add the HIPAA controls assessment. Or if you had a government healthcare concern, you might have to add HIPAA controls and the NIST 800-171 if they're a supplier and are required to under contract. But as you build out these programs, you're able to look at the status of previous assessments, understand satisfied, accepted, and POAM'd risk, and see where you sit within each one of these 18 domains very easily in the system. As we move along the road, for those that are existing VCIO Toolbox customers, you can leverage your strategic plan with your customer, or if you're just doing GRC, build a strategy plan with your customer and really show where the recommendations that are part of the POAM attach back to the goals and challenges your customer's facing. This does two things, obviously. It shows at a 50,000 foot level where we are in the process of delivering on our POAM. We can see exactly where those projects sit, which ones have been adopted formally by the customer, which ones have been delivered, which get those racing flags inherited there, and where we are in the process overall. I always call this a CEO page. Sometimes, most of the time, the CEO really just wants to understand where are we in our process, and you can kind of show them on, where the security plan is meeting the overall business objectives here. In the plan of action, We're able to look at each one of the individual projects that we've attached to this customer's environment. Ignore the name of some of these projects. This is my demo system. And you'll see here that we're, tracking things like what category the projects fall under, any summary we have, prioritization. If it's high, will stand out. Costs are very easy to catalog. And this is where we tie it back to that goals plan you just saw a moment ago, just like we do in the QBR side. The one major difference, we can do our assignments of resources. So we can actually choose both internal and external resources. So we can assign who is the owner and who has the responsibility here within the POAM. From a reporting standpoint, we have a number of different reports put in here. If you're doing just a straight up security and compliance review for a customer, you can simply generate the scorecard that shows where they sit within the individual, in this case, 18 different domains of CIS. And then we see our results and findings down below. We'll have our results, where we sit in terms of our 4 measures. Our best practice will be here. If there's any notes attached here, we'll have that be CISO note here. And then a link to the document will be part of the PDF produced report for the policy that's attached. If we've created tickets and recommendations, those sit as a unit. So as you're going through the findings report, or if you just generate a risk register, you can see what the next step action is going to be as well. And as I scroll to the bottom of this report, and again, ignore some of the items in our POAM here, as I have a combined POAM on this customer with a QBR as well. But you'll see down here that we're able to see our individual projects, their cost, start date and end date, current state, and who the owner of this project is. So we're able to report just on security and compliance. If we do want to add the strategy into play, we do have that with our security and compliance with strategic plan report. Here you'll see we're bringing in the goals, showing them visually and with their current status of adoption and completion. We then certainly move into our scorecard. We're starting to show our trends and risks over time and how things improve. And then we move into that vulnerability assessment and security piece again. And then just finalizing on this plan for a moment, you can go to a risk report scorecard or create your own recommendations. And for those that are subscribers and haven't used this yet, we do have this located in our meeting view now as well. You can toggle between your QBR and meeting view, but you can see here, very similar to what you see in the QBR space, you can run a meeting right out of this system as well to support your CIS requirements. You've got your meeting agenda. When you come into the dashboard here, where you're focused on the different programs we've done, we're able to see the trending on any scores over time. I don't happen to have multiples in this one, but you would see different area scores coming in and the date of completion. And you'll be able to track your POAM for your customer as well. We then can integrate our strategy. We can show our scorecard. And if we have multiple plans within this process, we can move to different program or different assessment types as well. We can move out to the exception report and see all the findings in detail. Head to our roadmap to see the CFO and high-level view of the program, our plan of action in a full budgetary format with the ability to filter on completion state, priority, and adoption. And then ultimately come into our plan of action, just like you do in the QBR as well, and really do the deep dive in these projects and work with your customer to either get adoption or if they decline it, to note the decline. So that's a very high level overview of what the system can support in CIS. Again, there's no, I truly don't have a bias between CIS or NIST CSF, or if you're doing a CMMC, they all have their place. But what I've definitely seen is a high percentage of adoption from our customers to the implementation group one when they're starting any program with a small to mid-sized business customer, because ultimately it speaks to the solutions we build. And we're really focused on what's most commonly impacting these folks, those non-targeted attacks that unfortunately, because they had a hole, they've now become a target of. So with that, I'm gonna close out today's session. And open up the floor for Ask Me Anything. For anybody that does need to drop off, I apologize that we went a couple minutes long today, but do appreciate you hanging in there. We do these coachings every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. West Coast. So by signing up today, I think that will keep you in the reminder queue as well. And if anybody does have any direct questions today, please pop them into the Q&A and chat. I'll hang on as long as questions are coming in. And I want to thank everybody that did attend today for joining us. All right. So I'm not seeing a lot of questions coming in. I'm going to do a little last call for questions. And with that, I want to thank everybody again, for jumping in. If you do have any questions and want to reach to me directly, didn't want to do it here in this public forum, please feel free to email me at bdoyle@vciotoolbox.com, and I'll do my best to get you the answer that you look for. And look forward to seeing you all again next week. Thanks so much for joining.